Welcome back, fellow hot rodders. Okay, let's put it this way. Today I want to cover something that would seem very simplistic, but it is blown out of proportion, and each individual might believe a different thing. Today we're going to be talking about fuel octane. Now, majority of the after, majority of the industry is revolving around pump gas because it's most available to the population. So, depending on what area you're in, you could have anything from an 87 to 110 octane available at your local gas station. Okay. Now, realize most of the gas pumps will have two or three options to push to determine what octane fuel you're getting. Okay. But if you ever have the chance to look inside of the pump, there's only two pipes. There's only two supply pipes. Okay. Only two underground tanks storing fuel. So whatever your lowest octane rating is compared to your highest octane rating, that's the separation between the two. In order to get that middle variant of octane level, it's a mix. Okay? Now, something that I've been doing for over 35 years now, basically, when it comes to racing, within our classes that we race in circle track and also within race engine building, depending on the compression, whether it be static or mechanical compression of the engine, most will believe that it will require a certain octane rating to avoid detonation. Easy enough. Now, the industry has basically gravitated around pump fuel because, once again, it's the most available. In order to get things like nitromethane, so on and so forth, there's an additional process, and things are much more expensive. For example, today is Tuesday, September 13th, 2025. Our local fuel costs here in central Wisconsin are $2.71 a gallon, okay, for 87 octane. In order to fill up my utility tools, such as chainsaws, lawnmowers, so on and so forth, I try to find the highest octane rating within the ethanol consuming fuels. So here in central Wisconsin, I don't know how it is the rest across the nation, they can have a content of up to 10% ethanol. Okay, now if you realize the octane rating of ethanol, it is actually higher than the octane rating of the gasoline. So if you're buying the absolute cheapest, swamp mud 87 octane fuel that may contain up to 10% ethanol, you're not truly buying fuel that is 87 octane rating. 10% of the mixture actually has an octane rating of approximately 110. So 10% of it's 110 octane, but the rest of the 90% is actually lower than 87 because the combination of the different fuels comes out with the average octane rating of 87 octane. But in a fuel pump or within your gas pump, one line might be 110 or say 91 octane. So if you choose 89 octane, it's a combination of the 87 and 91. Now, we can learn throughout history that octane ratings in that 80 to 90 range, they can operate pretty much anything in that 7-to-1 to 10-to-1 compression ratio. Okay, mechanical. I'm going to leave out static because that'll come up in conversation as we go. Now, even within dyno operations, guys will put in a splash of higher octane fuel in order to stay away from detonation. So say that you are using 90%, 91 octane, and you put a splash of 100 octane leaded fuel on top of it. What is your actual octane rating? Majority, 90% of it, is at 91%. Now, in order to get octane ratings above, say, 108, 108, 110 is when you start transitioning into leaded fuels. Okay, across the board, any kind of dedicated race fuel will be a leaded fuel. That's why most of your fuel injection type units, that are utilizing a catalytic converter or oxygen sensors, even if you're rebuilding even an LS7 type thing, the computers are designed around the air fuel ratios and the mixture of pump fuel, something that may contain a percentage of ethanol. If you were to actually put leaded fuel in a oxygen sensor equipped vehicle, you're not going to get accurate readings. You won't. You have to change the entire schematics within your computers to be able to adjust to that. Oxygen sensors are not designed around that. They're designed around pump fuel. So again, the most available fuel is what the engines are being engineered, designed for. Once you start getting into factory equipped fuel injection, you can't necessarily just make that jump right into the racing fuels or high compression ratio engines. That has become a thing of the past because of the available fuels that we have. But there's a lot of power within compression. A lot. Most individuals will say that there's approximately a 3% power increase for every 1 full point of compression increase. So if you're going from 9 to 11, you would actually have approximately 6% more power out of your combination. That's true within the lower numbers, so from 8 to 9, 9 to 10. Once you start going from 10 to 11, even 11 to 12, or even 13, the number will actually increase quite a bit. Now, with the higher numbers, say 11 to say 14 to 1 compression ratio, you'll need dedicated racing fuel. But it does not mean that you got to run on 100% racing fuel. So for instance, when I filled up yesterday at 271 a gallon for 87 octane, for all of my implements, my chainsaws, lawnmowers, and so on and so forth, I add a splash of 110 octane turbo blue, a leaded fuel. So with an 87 and a 110 octane splash, 10% approximately, what octane is my gasoline that I'm putting in my containers to actually run my lawnmowers, so on and so forth? Is it in the middle? No, it's still in that 87 to 89 octane, because once again, I'm only adding approximately 10%. Ethanol can also include approximately up to 10% of the fuel. So if I leave a splash of turbo blue, approximately 10%, and the fuel that I'm buying out of the pump also has approximately another 10% of ethanol added, now I'm getting more in that 91 to 93 octane is my overall average octane rating. But in addition to the volume, the 20% of higher octane fuels that are in pump fuel, leaded fuel, if you're working with a carbureted situation, not necessarily fuel injection, the lead in the fuel will also still do what it did and was intended for prior to 1974. The leaded fuel will also allow the intake valve and seats to run a little bit cooler. It will lubricate the valve and seat connection point. Okay? The older engines that did not have hardened exhaust seats, they required that lead amount to be able to lubricate the exhaust valve. But even today, with cylinder heads that have hardened seats, they will still see an advantage utilizing even a small portion of leaded fuel. So even though my chainsaws, let's say a steel chainsaw, is going to actually benefit from running a percentage of leaded fuel, even a lower amount is going to help both within cooling and lubrication of the internals of the engine, anything associated with the fuel. So again, going back to some of these videos, some of these dyno sessions where individuals, yeah, we're truly going to stay with pump gas. This engine is a pump gas friendly engine, but we're just putting a splash of higher octane gasoline into it just to be on the safe side. okay? Um, the numbers being shared are not going to be accurate to somebody that is utilizing straight pump fuel. There is an advantages to higher octane because of the lead content. Is it measurable? Okay, realizing lead has a much higher flash rate. It has more retention to detonation. Obviously, the higher octane and the lead itself will not burn necessarily. Okay, so are you going to get as much power out of something utilizing a heavier, higher octane fuel, especially in something that does not have 12-to-1 compression ratio? There is an advantage because of the lead, not necessarily of the octane rating of the gasoline used. So if you're truly watching and you're limiting yourself to compression because of the available fuel that you have in your pump gas within your gas station, and you're not paying, my Turbo Blue, just for example here, it was $2.71 a gallon of 87 octane fuel. Our Turbo Blue was $10 a gallon. What is my actual octane rating within the fuel that's in my containers meant for my lawnmowers? We have to remember fuel will ignite at its lowest octane rating, its lowest sensitivity rating. So even by combining a higher octane fuel, increasing the average mix of the entire fuel ratios, it's still going to ignite at the lowest rating. That's your lowest octane flash point. So if you're utilizing 87 octane, it's still going to ignite easier. So for hand-started operation, like chainsaws, lawnmowers, weed whackers, so on and so forth, you want to have that initial startup in order to just to get the ball rolling. But as the engine heats up, the advantages of the higher octane fuels and the lead content will allow the machinery to operate better. So that transfers onto engine dynos. Engines that might see and use, say, 93 octane, individual might say, oh, we just put a splash of race fuel into it just to deter from detonation. You are not changing the detonation ratio. You're adding a supplement of lead. So any power gains or any stability you see within the dyno runs is because of the lead content, even though it's very small. With our pump fuels, again, may contain up to 10% ethanol. These ratios, if you were to do a mix like that, your ratios change. Increasing your octane, your average octane number up. But your ignition, your fuel will start burning, will ignite at the lowest octane rating of fuel that you put into it. It's that simple. Is there more power in any of these ratings? The burn rate is different. The lower the octane, the faster the fuel burns. The higher the octane, the longer the burn process takes. So again, it's not only about the combustion pressures, how high they are with a mechanical or static compression, it's also within the stroke and the speed of the piston. So when you're choosing your combination to build and you realize the fuel that you have available to you, make sure that you're taking that into consideration with your build. Again, that reverse engineering. And how does the fuel attract condensation? The higher the octane the fuel, the faster it will consume and attract any of the air molecules, the condensations of the air, into the fuel in a faster amount of time. If you take a barrel, take the lid off of a 50-gallon barrel of 87 octane and let it sit for 6 months. When you come back, the octane rating will have lowered. The moisture content will have increased. Some of the vapors will will escape, so on and so forth, lowering the octane rating of the pump fuel from approximately 87 to 85. If you do that exact same process with a 50-gallon drum of 100 octane turbo blue, okay, I know this for a fact, all right, I've tested it multiple different times. If you take a barrel of 110 octane racing fuel and let it sit for the same amount of time with the lid off for 6 months, your octane rating will drastically change. It will lose approximately 10 points of octane. So again, determine when you're building your car, how often are you going to be driving it, how often are you going to be refueling the tank, and how well maintained is your local gas station. How old are the tanks that are under the ground? How much sediment? How often do they change the filters? How often are your local authorities checking the actual rate of how many gallons are being pumped out when you're getting fuel? Because in the long run, if you go to a gas station that doesn't get a lot of service or a lot of customers, the amount of time that fuel can sit in those tanks could be over a month, and they are aerated. They're being exposed to condensation. So your gas station, local gas station, it might constantly see, flow of traffic through it, so on and so forth, and the refueling tanker truck is there every single day. You're getting fresh fuel that will have an accurate octane rating. If you're in a rural community where maybe 10 cars pull up to the gas tank per day to fuel up, literally a month later, they're working off the same fuel capacity within their tanks to get fuel. Your octane rating will not be accurate. Fresh fuel, knowing what octane your engine needs, and within the design of the actual combustion chamber. Now, as I said, there's different things within the mechanical components of the engine that can also change their tolerance to detonation. Spark plug location, the sharp edges of the seats outside of the mating surface between the valve and the seat. So individuals will talk about the multi-angle valve angles. Any ridge that is outside of the mating surface of the valve itself, that creates a hot spot, period. The spark plug itself, the sharp edges of the spark plug creates a hot spot. Anything with a combustion chamber that has a sharp edge, it creates a hot spot. The mating surface between the cylinder block and the cylinder head itself, both edges create hot spots. Radiusing those small or softening those edges will increase your capable octane rating or reduce your required octane rating to create power. The taller the piston is, so going from a flat top to a dome piston, even though it may not change your actual compression ratio, okay, say that you have done work to the combustion chamber, if you've gone from a 64 cc combustion chamber to a 72, but you're adding a dome piston to regain or bring back that compression ratio, the dome of the piston will also change the durability, the required octane rating. So, for example, I might have confused you there. Let's use a small block Chrysler, for instance. If you do some machining or some grinding to the actual combustion chamber, enlarging it, okay, say that you're unshrouding the intake valve, you're increasing the size of the combustion chamber. Going from a flat top piston to a small dome, it'll make up the difference of what was removed from the combustion chamber and added into the piston. But the more material that is above the piston head, the top of the piston, the higher octane rating you're going to require. A dish style piston, to achieve with a very small combustion chamber, let's say a 58 cc combustion chamber, a dish piston will actually still create the same amount of compression, but it's going to be more tolerant to fuel octane. Different coatings to either the top of the piston, even oil squirters that are pointed to the bottom of the piston to relieve some of the heat. that is going to increase the durability of engines with lower octanes. Now, in the industry, it's kind of practiced within iron cylinder heads. Any engine equipped with an iron cylinder head, 11 to 1 is approximately about the range that can be achieved with 93 octane pump fuel. Okay, on average. It's going to change between each combustion chamber design and piston design. But there are engines in the 13.5 to 14:1 compression ratio that can still utilize swamp gas 87 octane fuel and survive. It's all in relation to the RPM of the engine and the design of the actual full combustion chamber, not only in the cylinder head, but including the piston design. Remember that you're reaching for the maximum of power that you can achieve with the restrictions you have within your fuel. It's not only just those two variables. There's multiple that are taken into that. Even the size of your intake valve can change the required fuel needed in the engine, because the intake valves will normally run hotter than the casting or cast iron or aluminum cylinder head material itself. Obviously, aluminum will extract heat and transfer it better. Aluminum head engines can easily get up to 12.5 to 13:1 on swamp gas and still survive. As you increase intake valve size or exhaust valve size, remember the valves run hotter than the actual cylinder head material. The piston design also changes where the compression is limited. The rounder the combustion chamber, the smoother all the edges, the higher you can push your engine and still utilize the lower and cheaper available gasoline. Whatever combination you're working with, if you're working out in the garage, you can use the safe ratios projected within the industry of that 11 to 1, 10.5, 11 to 1. But realize the faster your piston, the higher your RPMs, even with lower compression, say 9 to 1. If you're going over 7,000 RPM, your swamp gas will not be able to withstand it. Just the heat and the motion of these 7,000 RPMs will ignite it before the spark plug does. That's why in restricted racing classes, like our circle track or even some of our drag racing classes, they'll have rev limiters. So you're not even seeing 6,000 RPM. But the engines will detonate with straight 93 octane. And they're limited to 10.5 to 1 compression. With that small splash of 110 octane, we have no problems. Again, it's the lead. It's just that mix, allowing the final ratio of the fuel to be enough to stay away from detonation. Hopefully it helps. Have a good one.